This film tells the story of Colindale and how it changed from a rural district to become a London suburb, full of industries and a hospital and the home of the world-famous Hendon Aerodrome. The Colin part of the place name Colindale comes from a family called Colin, who were tenants of All Souls College, Oxford, at the time of the Tudor monarchs. But in those days, Colindale was called Colindene. A dene is a wooded valley with a river running through it, in this case the Silk Stream. Silk is derived from the word sulk, possibly after the nearby Roman post on the Edgware Road called Solonioikis, or from the Old English words for plough or furrow. Fortunately, All Souls College made a plan of their estate in the 1590s, which survives in their library today. At the top we can see the name Colindeep, used then to indicate the point at which the road forded the Silk Stream. Ansell Street is probably from the Norman French word for donkey, referring to pack-horse traffic. This shows the road was already very old. John Norden, the well-known topographer who lived in Hendon at the time, said that the road was an ancient highway now unaccustomed. Indeed, this part of the road was called Ancient Street in the 18th and 19th century. The All Souls College plan also shows several buildings north and south of the road. During the 17th and 18th century, the buildings south of the road disappeared, the woods were cleared, and the Dene became a dale, an open valley with a river. Colindene became Colindale. Victorian Colindale consisted of 4 houses, all north of Colindeep Lane: Rose Cottage, Colindale Cottage, Colindale Lodge, and Colindale Farm. Most of the year, the population consisted of the 25 residents of these 4 houses. Where our Colindale has thousands of people living in suburban streets, their Colindale was quiet hayfields, each with its own name. Where we have Colindale Avenue, they had Shoelands. Where we have Colindale Park and the new Colindale Gardens, they had Dock Field. Where we have Booth Road, they knew Hungerfield and Butcher's Lay. Every summer the quiet was disturbed by hundreds of people employed to cut and make hay. When the harvest was completed, the haymakers left. Then in the 1860s, the Midland Railway Company came and built the railway line between Bedford and London to the east of Colindale. 800 men and 80 horses worked constructing the mile-long railway embankments that came to define Colindale's eastern edge. When the Midland Railway widened the main line in the early 1880s, they blocked off the Ancient Street, diverted the road to the south, and built a new bridge over the railway called Colindeep Bridge. The name Ancient Street was lost forever. Quiet Colindale first came to public attention in the 1870s, when Colindale Cottage, Lodge and Farm were occupied by a farmer called George Nurse. To make extra money, Nurse kept a pack of stag hounds, one of only 5 such packs in the country. He also kept tame deer, reared to be hunted and brought back to the farm after each chase. Every Wednesday and Saturday, up to 150 men and women, both locals and Londoners, would meet at a starting point in the surrounding district. Nurse had a whip round after each chase and hired out horses. He wasn't particular about safety or the rider's skill. Accidents were frequent. In 1884, the pack and followers caused so much damage to one property that Nurse was forced to sell his hounds and over the next few years much of his property. After Nurse left Colindale, the Central London Sick Asylum, who provided health care for the poor of Westminster and Bloomsbury, came looking for a location for a new hospital. They wanted a country location for their long-term patients away from London's pollution and where the land was cheap. Eventually, they bought the 27 acres of Coppice Hill Fields from the Colin Farm estate in 1894. It was above the Silkstream, but away from the Edgware Road. To provide access for the hospital, they constructed a new road with a bridge over the Silkstream, which they called Asylum Road. The hospital was completed and opened in March 1900. In the 1901 census, there were 32 nurses under the direction of its first matron, Eleanor Smith, taking care of 275 patients from central London. A developer called Abraham Booth bought the rest of Colindale estate. Booth was in his 70s, but he had big dreams for the future of the district. He foresaw that one day Colindale would be full of suburban homes, and that he was going to make a fortune on the sales of plots to builders. It was Booth who changed the name of Asylum Road to Colindale Avenue in 1901. He planned to continue the road as far as Greyhound Hill, connecting his new development directly to the village of Hendon. It was Booth who laid out Booth Road. Originally from Colindale Lane, it was supposed to run through to Colindale Avenue and continue along the route of the Booth Road we know today. But Booth had little success attracting house builders to the area and was bankrupt by 1909. When he died in 1913, he left his son a meagre £5. Colindale Avenue went no further, and the district was left with the confusion of two Booth roads for 14 years. Eventually, Hendon Council renamed the Colindale part of Booth Road Sheaves Hill Avenue in 1927. He did manage to sell some of the estate, laying the foundations of industrial Colindale in the process. In the 1900s, land in central London could cost £1 million an acre, but in Colindale, Booth could sell the same for £25,000. This made it an ideal location for factories and storage facilities. First came Garstons Limited in January 1901, a leather goods manufacturer making portmanteaus, packing trunks and dog collars. Later in the same year came the Moody and Manners Opera Company. In Colindale, their seamstresses, costumerers and prop makers made everything for putting on a Gilbert and Sullivan operetta or a full-size Wagner opera. They also needed large storerooms for their scenery. In 1902, the British Museum built a warehouse for their historical newspaper collection. Here was kept every British newspaper published and a great many others from overseas and the Empire. The substantial new building, beloved of history researchers, was opened in 1932. The government lymph establishment, opened in 1907, produced the national supply of smallpox vaccines. Vaccines from the establishment were used to inoculate the whole of the British and American armed forces in Europe during both World Wars. There were many more factories in Colindale over the next 60 years. Here are a few we could have mentioned. The Metropolitan Electric Tramway Company started a service from Cricklewood to Edgware in 1903. They also purchased a 9-acre site just north of Colindale Avenue for a depot and workshops. Here, 250 men were employed in making and repairing the trams used on the company's 40-mile system. They experimented with a new German design for a trackless tram or trolley bus, even receiving planning permission for a service from Colindale to Golders Green. But when a rival bus company started a motor service from Hendon via Charles Hill and Golders Green, the scheme faded away. The trams were bringing hundreds of workers to Colindale from other parts of London daily by 1911, but by then another form of transport was attracting thousands. From 1910 until the early 1960s, Colindale was the home of Hendon Aerodrome, an important centre for pioneer flight before the First World War. So how did this come about? In 1909, Louis Blériot was the first man to fly across the English Channel, and this inspired two Colindale businessmen, Edgar Everett and Kennel Edgecombe, to build their own aircraft. There was not enough land at their electronic instrument factory in Colindale Lane for a flying ground, so they acquired some land at the end of Colindale Avenue. In January 1910, they applied to Hendon Council to put up a hangar in which they could keep their first machine, and another man called Claude Graham White made the first flights at the field in his Blériot monoplane. The field was excellent for flying, and the Everett and Edgecombe plane, nicknamed the Grasshopper, attracted a lot of attention, but it never flew higher than the hedges. In 1910, a French pilot, Louis Polhan, used the shed to put together his aircraft, which had been flat packed for transportation, and then successfully flew it to Manchester and back. The feat was newsworthy enough to attract investors in Colindale's airfield. By October 1910, there were several hangars containing flying schools and workshops building aeroplanes for rich clients. Claude Graham White bought the airfield in 1911, rebranding it as London Aerodrome. Graham White was an enthusiast, a business entrepreneur, and to be frank, a bit of a playboy. Under his direction, the aerodrome became famous for spectacular air displays, air races, and all sorts of publicity stunts, too many to describe here. Photographers did a roaring trade, providing the crowds with mementos of their heroes, and us with a record of the golden age of Hendon Aerodrome. But Hendon's golden age did not last. With the start of the First World War, many Colindale men joined up to fight and marched away to war. Many did not return. At home, the increasing demand for military aircraft in the 4 years of the war between 1914 and 1918 turned Colindale's workshops into factories with mass production. What had been the preserve of skilled men developed into assembly lines employing thousands of women. To understand the changes which took place in Colindale during the war, we can use this bird's eye view of Colindale made in 1920. So what is what in this photograph? Here is Colindale Avenue, and here is the hospital. But here is an entirely new road. This is Aerodrome Road, built by German prisoners of war in 1917. Here is the earliest image of what would become Aerodrome Road in Barnett's collection. In 1907, two goods trains collided at Colindale Junction. The people are watching the massive railway cranes haul the engines back onto the rails. Aerodrome Road was just a muddy track. This is the Aerodrome Road in 1920, with the Graham White factory on both sides of the road. In 1917, it employed 3,000 people constructing aircraft. Here, at the top of the original Booth Road, is Titanine Limited. From 1917, they made dope, a varnish painted onto the cloth of aircraft wings to stiffen and strengthen them. Dope had been notoriously noxious, and breathing it caused lung disease. The factory conditions led to health problems in the workers applying it. Titanine's revolutionary dope was safe to breathe, but very explosive. The works blew up twice in the interwar years. Straddling both sides of the Edgware Road, we can see the mighty Aircraft Manufacturing Company Limited, better known as Airco. By December 1918, it was said to be the largest aircraft company in the world, employing 7,000 staff. To bring material to the different factories, a temporary railway was built and opened in May 1918. It ran from the Midland Main Line, with branches to the Aerodrome, the Graham White factory, and Airco on the Edgware Road. It was still in use when the American company General Motors opened their Colindale factory making Chevrolets for the European market in 1922, and probably survived until 1931, when Hendon Council purchased the land for Montrose Park. An engine shed from the railway still stands in Montrose Park today. After the war, demand for aircraft declined, and both the Airco and Graham White factories closed by the mid-1920s. They were bought out by other companies making other products. What we can't see in this aerial view are suburban streets. The area is still relatively rural. Most of the houses that have been built are for workers in the local factories. By 1917, the northern section of Booth Road had been started and included Aeroville Cottages, a complex of houses for Graham White's workers. On Colindale Avenue are Red Ruth Villas for Moody and Manners Opera Company, the founder, Charles Manners, living in the house on the far left. Further down is Leatherville, built by Arthur Garston as a terrace for his ordinary workers and as a group of villas on Colindeep Lane for the managers. Arthur Garston was teetotal, and when William Brown opened Colindale stores in 1907, his application for a beer licence was blocked. Mr. Garston said that his work people had settled there for quietness and did not want to drink. He continued that the employees were teetotalers and there was no need for a licence. This meant that Colindale was dry, very dry. Only after Garston's death did Colindale obtain its first public house in 1927. Between 1923 and 1924, 3,000 men were employed excavating the cuttings and tunnels of a new tube railway. Colindale Station, designed by the architect Stanley Heaps, opened in August 1924. Now there were smart, clean electric trains into the West End and the City of London. After this, Colindale became attractive to suburban house builders. From the mid-1920s into the late 1930s, the area filled with houses. First to start building houses was Ernest Trowbridge. His houses use a lot of elmwood and have an old-world charm. The best example is where he replaced Colindale Cottage with the Gables, now 168 Colindeep Lane, in 1926. Many other builders were to follow, and here are a few. The Air Ministry took over the whole aerodrome north of Aerodrome Road from Graham White in 1922. To make money, Graham White used the flying ground south of Aerodrome Road to open the London Country Club. Although a new clubhouse was built with a golf course visible from this image, the club never really took off and it closed in 1926. After a brief period as factory offices, the clubhouse was converted into Hendon Police College in 1934, brainchild of Hugh Trenchard, the retired Commander-in-Chief of the RAF. He was Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police between 1931 and 1935. Trenchard's college was founded upon modern and scientific approaches to policing. There were detective training facilities and a police driving school. Hendon Aerodrome became the home of the Royal Air Force. Between the wars, the RAF annual pageants captured the public's imagination and demonstrated to the world the RAF's skill and aircraft. During World War II, Colindale's factories turned to patriotic production. Titanine still produced dope and also aviation paint. Duples, the coachmakers, turned out Halifax bombers, and Franco Signs produced de Havilland bombers, then the fastest plane in the world. All the industry and the aerodrome made Colindale a particular target during the Blitz of 1940. Both the newspaper library and Colindale Station were hit, where 12 people were killed. In 1944, the hospital, which was full of war wounded at the time, was hit by a V-1 flying bomb and 20 were killed. After the war, Colindale picked itself up and got back to work. But even before the war, Hendon Aerodrome was proving too small as the RAF's aircraft were too powerful and needed longer airstrips. Regular flying finished in the 1950s, and the last of the runways was removed in 1968. The land was replaced by the Graham Park estate.